1. Let's dive deeper into this rad 1981 Ford Thunderbird that's cruising onto the market for $13,500. I'm totally stoked about this find, and I think you will be too. So picture this. It's 1981, Reagan's just taken office, and Ford's rolling out this sweet T-Bird. Fast forward to today, and this baby's still turning heads. The seller's not kidding when they say it's in excellent condition. Being dry stored for 2 decades has kept this bird singing. Now let's talk specs. This bad boy's rocking a 302 cubic inch V8 engine. That's 5.0 liters of pure American muscle, folks. It's paired with an automatic transmission, making it a smooth operator on the streets. With rear-wheel drive, you know this coupe's got some get up and go when you need it. The odometer's sitting pretty at 120,000 miles, which averages out to only about 3,000 miles a year. That's practically nothing for a well-maintained car like this. And speaking of maintenance, that clean title suggests this T-Bird's been treated right over the years. Let's talk about that brown paint for a sec. It's not just any brown, it's that perfect warm 80s brown that screams classic luxury. It's like the automotive equivalent of a leather armchair and a good book. Classy, comfortable, and totally vintage. Now check out these features. For 1981, this bird is fully loaded. Power windows? Check. Factory air conditioning? You bet. And get this, it's even got a factory cassette player. Time to dust off those mixtapes, am I right? These features might seem basic now, but back in '81, this was living large. I gotta be real with you though. The seller mentions that CL classics stop at 1980. So technically, this '81 model might not be considered a true classic by some standards. But hey, who makes these rules anyway? In my book, any car that survived 4 decades looking this good is a classic. One thing to keep in mind, always, and I mean always, check out a vintage ride like this in person before you buy. Photos can hide a multitude of sins, and with older cars, you want to know exactly what you're getting into. Bottom line, folks, this 1981 Thunderbird is a slice of automotive Americana that's been preserved better than most. Whether you're a die-hard Ford fan, a T-Bird enthusiast, or just someone who appreciates a well-kept piece of history, this car deserves a look. 2. We're checking out a 1975 Pontiac Firebird that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $8,000. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This bird's got some issues, but it's also got some serious potential. Let's start with the good stuff. This is a Firebird Esprit model, which is pretty cool. It's packing a mildly built Pontiac 400 engine, paired with a TH350 transmission and a 3.42 Posey traction rear end. That's a solid drivetrain combo that should provide some decent performance. The sellers also installed a Hotchkiss TVS suspension system, headers, and dual exhaust, which are nice upgrades. Now here's where we need to get real. The seller admits this Firebird needs some work. It currently needs a starter and has a vacuum leak, so it's not running at the moment. The body needs some attention too, so you'll need to factor in some bodywork costs. The odometer shows 60,000 miles, but it's rolled over, so the actual mileage is unknown. The car is listed in good condition, but given the issues mentioned, I'd say it's more of a project car at this point. It'll need to be trailered home, so keep that in mind if you're considering it. On the plus side, it's got a clean title, and the black paint could look pretty sharp once it's all fixed up. The seller mentions they love this car and don't want to sell, which often means it's been cared for despite its current issues. Look, I get it. A '75 Firebird is a cool piece of American muscle car history. With some work, this could be a really sweet ride, but you've got to go into this with your eyes open. It's not a turnkey car. It's a project that'll need some love, time, and money. If you're handy with a wrench and looking for a Firebird to restore, this could be a great opportunity. Just make sure you inspect it thoroughly and factor in all the repair costs before making a decision. 3. We're taking a look at a real gem from the '80s, a 1984 Cadillac Eldorado that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $13,000. Let me tell you, this isn't your average old caddy. This one's been given some serious TLC. First off, let's talk about the condition. The seller claims it's excellent, and from the description, I'm inclined to believe them. This Eldorado has been stripped down and repainted, which means it's probably looking fresh and clean in that classic Cadillac blue. With only 82,000 miles on the odometer, it's barely broken in for a car of this vintage. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. This luxury coupe is powered by a V8 engine, which was the heart and soul of American luxury back in the day. It's got front-wheel drive, which was pretty innovative for its time, especially in a car this size. The automatic transmission should make for smooth cruising, just as Cadillac intended. What really catches my eye is the list of new parts. We're talking a new starter, alternator, fuel pump, battery, and exhaust system. That's a lot of critical components that have been replaced, which means you're less likely to run into issues with those in the near future. Plus, the AC blows cold, a must-have for a luxury car, especially if you're in a warmer climate. One of the coolest features of this Eldorado is the 3-stage sunroof. That's not something you see every day, especially on a car from 1984. It's a neat feature that really adds to the luxury feel of this Caddy. The interior is original, which can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's great to have the original materials and design. On the other, 40-year-old interiors can sometimes show their age. However, given that the seller describes the car as super clean, I'm hoping this means the interior has been well preserved. Now, I always like to be upfront about these things. $13,000 isn't chump change for a car from 1984. But considering the work that's been done, the low mileage, and the overall condition, it could be a fair price for the right buyer. These Eldorados are becoming increasingly collectible, especially ones in good condition like this seems to be. Remember, folks, always inspect a classic car in person before making a purchase. Take it for a test drive if possible, and maybe even get a mechanic to look it over. But if everything checks out, this 1984 Cadillac Eldorado could be a fantastic way to cruise in 80s luxury style. 4. We're diving into a real blast from the past, a 1971 Chrysler Newport that's currently cruising its way onto Craigslist for a cool $4,500. Now let me tell you, this ain't your average grocery getter. First off, the seller's got a sense of humor, calling it so ugly it's beautiful. And I gotta say, I kinda agree. These old land yachts have a charm all their own. We're looking at a big green sedan that's sure to turn heads wherever it goes. Under the hood, we've got a 383 cubic inch big block V8 with a 2-barrel carb. It's not gonna win any races, but it'll get you down the road with that classic American V8 rumble. The odometer shows 81,000 miles, which isn't bad at all for a 50-year-old car. Now let's talk about condition. The seller says it's good, and they've put some work into it. We're talking a new master cylinder, water pump, and fuel pump. That's some serious maintenance that'll keep this beast on the road. The body seems to be in decent shape too, with only one small rust spot that's been fixed. That's pretty impressive for a car of this vintage. Inside, the seats are holding up well with minimal wear on the fabric. The seller's even gone the extra mile to remove some trim to clean out dust. That's the kind of attention to detail you like to see in a classic car owner. But let's be real, this old girl isn't perfect. The factory air conditioning needs a recharge, and some of the trim is currently off the car, though it's all included. And let's not forget, these old land yachts are thirsty. The seller's not shy about mentioning the fuel consumption, so keep that in mind if you're thinking about daily driving this beauty. One cool feature is the original bumper jack. That's a neat piece of history right there. And with power steering and an automatic transmission, it should be pretty easy to handle despite its size. Look, at $4,500, this isn't the cheapest car out there, but it's not bad for a running driving piece of American automotive history. It's got charm, character, and a big old V8 under the hood. Plus, the seller's even open to cryptocurrency if that's your thing. Remember, folks, always inspect a classic in person before buying. Take it for a spin, listen for any weird noises, and maybe get a mechanic to give it a once-over. But if everything checks out, this 1971 Chrysler Newport could be your ticket to cruising in style. 5. We're checking out a real gem on Craigslist, a 1973 Ford Maverick that's up for grabs at $5,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average 73 Maverick. This baby's had some serious work done. First off, let's talk about the heart of this beast. It's rocking a 5.0-liter V8 engine. That's 302 cubic inches for you old-school folks, with an automatic transmission. But here's the kicker. The engine is brand spanking new. And it's not just any old rebuild. They've slapped on an Edelbrock 4-barrel carburetor. That means this Maverick's got some serious get up and go. Now let's address the elephant in the room: rust. Or should I say, the lack thereof. The seller proudly states, no rust, which is pretty impressive for a nearly 50-year-old car. That's a huge plus in my book. This Maverick's been upgraded in all the right places. We're talking front disc brake conversion, new shocks and springs all around, a brand new gas tank, and a fresh exhaust system from headers to tailpipe. They've even installed electric fans to keep that new engine cool. The interior is described as being in good condition, and all the lights are working. Headlights, brake lights, turn signals, the whole shebang. The windshield is new, and all the other windows are crack and chip-free. That's not always a given with classics. One of the coolest upgrades, in my opinion, is the Borgeson Power Steering Conversion Kit. That includes a new gearbox, pump, lines, center drag link, and tie rods. This means you get modern steering feel in a classic package, the best of both worlds. To top it all off, it's rolling on 15-inch Craigslist wheels, which give it that perfect period-correct hot rod look. The tires are described as Descent. I think they meant decent, so you might want to budget for new rubber soon. Now, the odometer shows 37,000 miles, but with all these upgrades and the new engine, the mileage is pretty much irrelevant at this point. This Maverick has basically been rebuilt from the ground up. At $5,000, this seems like a pretty sweet deal for a classic Ford that's had this much work done. It's not a show car, but it sounds like a solid driver that you could enjoy right away and gradually improve over time. 6. We're diving into a real piece of American muscle history. A 1973 Chevy Nova that's up for grabs on Craigslist for $4,000. Now, let me be straight with you. This isn't a show car, but it's got potential written all over it. Let's start with the heart of this beast. A rebuilt Chevy 350 V8 that's only got about 30,000 miles on it since the rebuild. It's paired with a rebuilt TH350 transmission, both done about 3 years ago. That's a solid powertrain combo that should give you plenty of grunt. They've even slapped on some high-performance headers and a custom exhaust, so this Nova's got a growl that'll turn heads. Now, I've got to be honest with you, this Nova's got some issues. The seller's upfront about it being in fair condition, and they're not kidding. The interior's seen better days, there's some rust that's been addressed but still needs work, and it needs some body work, especially on the front driver's side. The temperature gauge is on the fritz, and the radio needs some wiring work. But here's the thing, it's a project car with good bones. The engine's been recently tuned, it's got a new AVS2 Eddie Brooke carb, and there are plenty of new parts like the alternator, battery, and starter. The tires are only a year old, and it comes with a bunch of spare parts and a repair manual. The seller's thrown in some upgrades too, like a custom mahogany racing wheel and some aftermarket speakers. And get this, they claim it's faster than you'd expect for a Chevy 350. Just be prepared for the occasional backfire and some old-school brakes that'll require some planning to stop. Look, at $4,000, you're not getting a perfect car. But what you are getting is a piece of American muscle car history that's mechanically sound and ready for some TLC. It's got character, it's got potential, and with some elbow grease, it could be a real head-turner. Remember, folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, listen to that V8 roar, and maybe bring along a mechanic friend to give it a once-over. But if you're looking for a project car with some serious potential, this 73 Nova might just be your ticket to muscle car heaven. 7. We're taking a look at a real gem from the muscle car era, a 1966 Plymouth Belvedere 2 that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $14,500. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average old Plymouth. This one's got some serious history. First off, we're talking about a one-owner car here, folks. That's right. This Belvedere has been with the same owner since it rolled off the lot back in '66. That's pretty rare for a car of this vintage and often means it's been well cared for. Under the hood, we've got a V8 engine paired with an automatic transmission. The seller doesn't specify which V8, But in '66 you could get anything from a 273 cubic inch all the way up to a big 426 Hemi in these cars. Whatever's in there, it's hooked up to a custom exhaust system, so you know this baby's got a nice rumble to it. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The seller claims this Belvedere is all original with its original paint, and get this, it's been garage kept all these years. That's music to a classic car lover's ears. They also mention there's no rust and the body is clean. If that's true, it's pretty impressive for a 55-year-old car. The odometer shows just 10,000 miles, but given the age of the car, it's likely rolled over at least once. Still, it suggests this Plymouth hasn't been driven into the ground. Some nice features to note. It's got power steering, which makes this big old girl easier to maneuver, and it's equipped with air conditioning. That AC is a pretty desirable option in a classic like this, especially if it's still working. The seller mentions they have the original wheels too, which is great for authenticity. And with a clean title, you shouldn't have any paperwork headaches if you decide to take this beauty home. Now, I've got to be straight with you. $14,500 isn't chump change. But for a one-owner, garage-kept original paint Belvedere from the heart of the muscle car era, it could be a fair price if everything checks out. Remember folks, always inspect a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, check for any hidden rust or issues, and maybe get a mechanic who knows old Mopars to give it a once-over. But if everything's as good as it sounds, this '66 Belvedere could be your ticket to cruising in true muscle car style. 8. We're diving into a real piece of American luxury, a 1964 Buick Riviera that's currently cruising its way onto Craigslist for $15,000. Now, let me tell you, this isn't just any old Buick. We're talking about one of the most stylish cars of the 1960s. First off, let's talk about what's under the hood. This Riviera is packing a 425 cubic inch nailhead V8, the last and arguably best iteration of Buick's famous nailhead engine. That's some serious muscle for a luxury coupe, folks. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This Riv isn't in perfect condition. The seller honestly lists it as fair, and there's a reason for that. It was restored about 15 years ago, but then spent a good chunk of time parked outside. As we all know, Mother Nature isn't kind to classic cars. The chrome is described as being in driver condition, which usually means it's presentable, but not show quality. There are also some interior pieces that need replacing due to corrosion. That's not uncommon for a car that's been exposed to the elements, but it's something you'll need to factor into your budget if you're thinking about buying. On the bright side, this Riviera has some great features. It's got power steering and power brakes, which make it much easier to handle than some other classics from this era. It also has a tilt steering column, which is a nice touch for driver comfort. The seller mentions that it's a strong, great-running car, which is always good to hear. They've had it garaged for the past couple of years, which has probably helped slow down any further deterioration. With an odometer reading of 79,565 miles, it's got some life experience, but that's not necessarily a bad thing for a car of this vintage, especially if it's been well maintained mechanically. Now, here's the kicker. The seller notes that nice examples of these cars can sell for between $30,000 and $60,000. At $15,000, this one is priced as a project car, which is exactly what it is. It's a chance to get into a really cool piece of automotive history without breaking the bank, but you've got to be prepared to put in some work, or money, to bring it back to its former glory. Remember folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, listen for any odd noises, and maybe get a trusted mechanic to give it a once-over. But if you're looking for a project car with tons of style and a great engine, this '64 Riviera could be your ticket to cruising in vintage luxury. 9. We're taking a look at a real piece of American luxury, a 1970 Buick Riviera that's currently cruising its way onto Craigslist for $9,500. Now, let me tell you, this isn't a perfect show car, but it's got some serious potential. First off, let's talk about what's under the hood. This Riviera is packing a 405 cubic inch V8 engine. That's some serious muscle, folks. The seller says it's mechanically sound and runs great, which is always good to hear with a car of this vintage. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This Riv isn't in pristine condition. The seller honestly describes the body as fair and mentions that the paint is faded. It's wearing its original beige color, but it sounds like it's seen better days. There's also some rust lurking under the vinyl top, which is a common issue with these old boats. On the bright side, there's been some recent work done that should give you some peace of mind. We're talking a complete brake job, including new brake lines, a new carburetor, and a complete exhaust system. That's some serious maintenance that'll keep this beauty on the road. The interior is described as fair, which probably means it's showing its age but still serviceable. The odometer is broken, so the 120,000 miles shown might not be accurate. But hey, it's a 50-year-old car. Mileage is more about condition than numbers at this point. Now, here's the kicker. The seller says it wouldn't take much to make it look fantastic. That's the kind of thing that gets a car enthusiast's heart racing. This Riviera could be a great candidate for a rolling restoration. Drive it and enjoy it, while you gradually bring it back to its former glory. At $9,500, you're not getting a show-ready car, but you are getting a solid foundation with one of Buick's most iconic models. The price is firm, so the seller seems confident in what they're offering. Remember, folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, listen to that big 455 rumble, and maybe get a trusted mechanic to give it a once-over. Pay special attention to that rust under the vinyl top. That could be a bigger issue if left unchecked. 10. We're diving into a real gem from the golden age of American automobiles. A 1970 Chevrolet Impala that's cruising onto Craigslist for a cool $15,000. And let me tell you, this isn't your average grocery getter. First off, we're talking about a triple green beauty here, folks. Show-quality green mist paint, dark green vinyl top, and a green brocade cloth interior. That's a color combo you don't see every day, and it sounds absolutely stunning. Now here's the kicker. This Impala's got just 93,034 original miles on its all-original drivetrain. That's practically nothing for a 50-year-old car, especially one that's been driven and enjoyed like this one has. The seller's not messing around when it comes to options. This bad boy is loaded with 21 factory options, and it comes with the original invoice and build sheet to prove it. That's a goldmine for authenticity buffs. Let's talk condition. The seller claims this Impala has 0 cancer. That's music to any classic car lover's ears. They've owned it for 19 years and have put it through its paces, driving it over mountain passes and in triple-digit heat without a hitch. That's the kind of reliability you want in a classic. Now I know what some of you might be thinking, but it's a 4-door. Well, the seller's got some choice words for that mindset, and I've got to say, I kind of agree. This Impala's a piece of automotive history, regardless of how many doors it's got. At $15,000, this Impala is priced competitively, especially considering its condition and originality. The seller's not interested in trades, and they've got a clear title in hand, which makes for a straightforward deal. Remember, folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, check out that green on green on green color scheme, and maybe bring along a mechanic friend to give it a once-over. But if you're in the market for a show-quality Impala that you can actually drive and enjoy, this 70 model could be your ticket to cruising in style. It's a turnkey classic that's ready to hit the road or the show circuit. 11. We're taking a look at a real gem from the 80s, a 1984 Chevrolet Corvette that's currently cruising its way onto Craigslist for $12,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average C4 Vet. This one's got some serious low-mileage appeal. First off, we're talking about a Z51 package car here, which means it's got the performance suspension setup. That's always a plus for those who like their vets to handle well. But here's the kicker. This baby's only got 9,220 miles on the clock. That's incredibly low for a nearly 40-year-old car, folks. Under the hood, we've got the tried-and-true Chevy V8, paired with a 4-Porsche 3-speed manual transmission. For those who might not know, that's a 4-speed manual with an overdrive unit, giving you better fuel economy on the highway. It's a cool setup that's unique to these early C4 Corvettes. The seller claims it's all original and in collection condition, which is pretty impressive given its age. They've also done some recent maintenance, including new brakes, a new battery, new fuel pump, and a fresh oil change. Plus, it's had a professional detail inside and out. That's the kind of care you like to see in a classic car. Now, I've got to be straight with you. Even low-mileage cars can have issues, and this one's no exception. The seller's up front about a few problems. The driver's side pop-up headlight grinds when closing. There's a small oil leak, and the AC needs a recharge. These aren't deal breakers, but they're something to keep in mind. On the plus side, all the power accessories are working, including the mirrors, seats, wipers, radio, and overdrive. That's not always a given with 80s cars, so it's good to see. At $12,000 OBO, this Corvette is priced in the ballpark for a low-mileage, well-maintained C4. The seller's also open to trades, which could be interesting if you've got something cool to offer. Remember, folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, listen for any odd noises, and maybe get a trusted mechanic to give it a once-over. But if you're looking for an 80s Corvette that's barely been driven, this 84 could be your ticket to reliving the era of big hair and even bigger shoulder pads. 12. We're diving into a real piece of 1970s American luxury, a 1973 Mercury Grand Marquis that's currently cruising its way onto Craigslist for $6,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average old boat. This one's got some interesting features and a few quirks to boot. First off, let's talk about what's under the hood. This Grand Marquis is packing a 429 cubic inch V8 engine. That's a big block, folks, and it means this land yacht has got some serious power. The seller even describes it as very fast, which isn't something you hear every day about a car this size. Now, I've got to point out a bit of confusion in the listing. The seller lists it as front-wheel drive, but that's almost certainly a mistake. The 73 Grand Marquis was rear-wheel drive, so keep that in mind. This big green machine has only 67,000 original miles on the clock, which is pretty low for a nearly 50-year-old car. It's equipped with an automatic transmission and all the power options you'd expect in a luxury car of its era. Power windows, locks, and even a power stereo. The seller mentions that the interior has been fully restored, which is a big plus. These old luxury cars can often have worn-out interiors, so a fresh one is definitely a selling point. It's also got a vinyl top, which was all the rage in the 70s. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This car isn't perfect. The seller mentions some front body damage, which is something you'll want to check out in person. They don't specify how severe it is, so that's definitely something to investigate further. On the bright side, the seller describes it as very reliable, which is always good to hear with an older car. They also mention old-school driving, which I take to mean it provides that classic, floaty luxury car ride that these big 70s cruisers are known for. At $6,000, this Grand Marquis is priced in the realm of a driver-quality classic. It's not a show car, but it sounds like it could be a cool cruiser with some character. Remember, folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, check out that front-end damage, and maybe get a trusted mechanic to give it a once-over. But if you're looking for a piece of 70s luxury that can still turn heads and possibly burn rubber, this 73 Grand Marquis might just be your ticket to cruising in style. 13. We're taking a look at a real piece of American muscle, a 1971 Ford Mustang convertible that's currently galloping its way onto Craigslist for $15,000. Now let me tell you, this isn't just any old pony car. This one's got some serious muscle under the hood. First off, we're talking about a convertible here, folks. There's nothing quite like cruising with the top down in a classic Mustang, feeling the wind in your hair and hearing that V8 rumble. Speaking of which, this 71 is packing a 351 Cleveland V8 engine. That's a seriously potent power plant that Ford only used for a few years, and it's known for making some serious horsepower. But here's where it gets even better. This Mustang's got a 4-speed manual transmission. That means you get to row your own gears and really feel connected to the car. There's nothing quite like banging through the gears in a big V8 muscle car. The seller says it runs great, which is always good to hear with a classic car. They've also mentioned it's got a clean title, so you shouldn't have any paperwork headaches if you decide to take this beauty home. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This Mustang isn't perfect. The seller mentions a couple of bad spots on paint, so it's not a show-quality finish. But hey, that just means you can drive it and enjoy it without worrying about every little rock chip, right? The car's sporting a red paint job, which is a classic color for a Mustang. It's sure to turn heads wherever you go, especially with the top down on a sunny day. At $15,000, this Mustang is priced in the ballpark for a driver-quality 71 convertible with the desirable 351 Cleveland engine. It's not the cheapest Mustang out there, but it's also not priced like a fully restored show car either. Remember folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying. Take it for a spin, listen to that V8 roar, and maybe get a trusted mechanic to give it a once-over. Pay special attention to those bad spots in the paint. Make sure they're just cosmetic and not hiding any rust issues. But if you're looking for a classic Mustang convertible that you can actually drive and enjoy, this 71 could be your ticket to muscle car heaven. With its potent V8, manual transmission, and top-down fun, it's got all the ingredients for some serious cruising enjoyment. 14. We're taking a look at a classic piece of American sports car history, a 1977 Chevrolet Corvette C3 that's currently cruising its way onto Craigslist for $9,800. Now let me tell you, this isn't a perfect show car, but it sounds like a solid driver that's been well cared for. First off, we're talking about a C3 Corvette here, folks. That's the generation that really cemented the Corvette's iconic long hood, short deck styling. This one's sporting a white paint job, which always looks sharp on these vets. Now let's talk numbers. This Corvette's got 116,000 miles on the clock. That might seem like a lot, but for a 45-year-old car that's been driven and enjoyed, it's not too shabby. The seller describes it as mechanically sound, which is always good to hear with a classic car. One of the best things about this Vetta is that it's been garage stored. That's crucial for these older cars, as it helps prevent rust and keeps the interior from deteriorating. The seller's even throwing in a newly purchased custom-fit cover, which is a nice bonus for keeping it protected. The listing doesn't mention specifics about the engine or transmission, but being a 77 model, it likely has the L48 350 cubic inch V8 paired with an automatic transmission. These weren't the most powerful Corvettes ever made, thanks emissions regulations, but they still offer that classic Corvette driving experience. Now, I've got to be straight with you. The seller doesn't provide a ton of details about the car's condition. They describe it as good, but without more info or pictures, it's hard to know exactly what that means. It could be a really clean example, or it might have some issues that aren't mentioned. On the plus side, the seller says they can provide all the paperwork for work done on the car. That's a great sign, as it shows the car's been maintained, and you'll have a record of what's been done to it. At $9,800, this Corvette is priced in the ballpark for a driver-quality C3 from this era. It's not the cheapest one out there, but it's also not priced like a fully restored show car either. A 15. We're diving into a real gem from the early 80s, a 1981 Lincoln Town car that's currently cruising its way onto Craigslist for $7,800. Now let me tell you, this isn't your average old luxury boat. This one's got some seriously low mileage that'll make your jaw drop. First off, we're talking about a full-size luxury sedan here, folks. The Lincoln Town car was the epitome of American luxury in its day, and this 81 model is no exception. It's packing a V8 engine under that long hood, paired with an automatic transmission for smooth, effortless cruising. But here's the kicker. This baby's only got 27,777 miles on the clock. That's incredibly low for a car that's pushing 40 years old. If that odometer reading is accurate, this town car has barely been broken in. The seller describes the condition as excellent, which isn't hard to believe given the low mileage. They also use the phrase quite incredible, which suggests this car might be something special. Now, I've got to be straight with you. The seller's description is pretty sparse on details. They're clearly playing it close to the vest, inviting potential buyers to come see the car in person. That's not uncommon with classic cars, as pictures often don't do them justice. One thing that caught my eye is the seller's openness to offers without seeing the car in person. That's a bit unusual. But they say it weeds out the tire kickers, so they're clearly looking for serious buyers. At $7,800, this town car is priced in the realm of a well-maintained, low-mileage example. It's not cheap for an '81 model, but if it's as good as the seller hints, it could be a fair price for a time capsule car. Remember, folks, always check out a classic car in person before buying if possible. Take it for a spin, check for any signs of age or wear that you wouldn't expect in a low-mileage car, and maybe get a trusted mechanic to give it a once-over. 16. I've got something special to share with you today. We're talking about a 1980 Chevy El Camino that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $13,800. Now, I know what you're thinking, that's a pretty penny for a 40-year-old vehicle. But let me tell you, this isn't your average El Camino. This blue beauty has only 37,000 miles on the odometer, which is incredibly low for a car of this age. The seller's description paints a picture of a vehicle that's been cherished and well-maintained throughout its life. Originally purchased by someone who barely drove it, this El Camino spent most of its early years tucked away in a garage. In 1996, it found a new home with a retired building inspector who decided to give it some serious upgrades. We're talking a fresh paint job, new exhaust, and a beefed-up transmission with quick shift gears. They even threw in a mild cam for good measure. All this work was done by a professional speed shop in Tucson, Arizona, so you know it's quality. Now let's talk about the nitty-gritty. This El Camino is packing an 8-cylinder engine, rear-wheel drive, and an automatic transmission. It's got a clean title, and the seller claims the interior is nearly flawless. They've also added some modern conveniences like electric power locks and an alarm system. But here's where it gets really interesting. This El Camino has had less than 1,200 miles put on it since its last oil change in 2016. It's sporting brand new tires and brakes all around, and it's even got cold air conditioning. That's a big plus for those hot summer cruises. Now, I've got to be straight with you. While the seller describes the condition as excellent, we have to remember this is still a 40-year-old vehicle. It's been sitting for a while, which means it might need some attention to get it road ready. But for a classic car enthusiast looking for a well-preserved piece of automotive history, this El Camino could be a real find. The seller mentions that it just needs someone who will enjoy it instead of letting it sit. So if you've been dreaming of cruising down the highway in a classic El Camino, this might be your chance. It's not often you find a vehicle of this age with such low mileage and in such well-maintained condition. In the end, whether this El Camino is worth the asking price depends on how much you value a well-preserved classic. It's certainly not for everyone, but for the right buyer, this could be a real treasure. Just remember, with any classic car purchase, it's always a good idea to see it in person, and maybe even get a professional inspection before making a decision. 17. Let me tell you about this absolutely wild 1978 AMC Gremlin that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $15,000. Now I know what you're thinking, a Gremlin for 15 grand? But trust me, this isn't your average Gremlin. This red beauty has only 40,000 miles on the clock, which is incredibly low for a car that's over 4 decades old. It's rocking a 6-cylinder engine, rear-wheel drive, and a manual transmission. A combo that's sure to put a smile on any classic car lover's face. But here's where it gets really interesting. This particular Gremlin has a unique history that sets it apart from the rest. The seller claims it was a big hit at SEMA a few years back, and for good reason. This little hatchback was modified from top to bottom and, get this, even had tracks installed. That's right, tracks, like a snowmobile. You can actually check out videos of this beast in action by searching Snow Gremlin on YouTube. Now, the seller describes the condition as excellent, and while I can't verify that without seeing it in person, the features list is pretty impressive for a Gremlin. We're talking power steering, power brakes, and even air conditioning. That's luxury living in 1978 terms. The seller also mentions that it's a very nice driver, which suggests it's not just a showpiece. This Gremlin is ready to hit the road. And with a clean title, you won't have to worry about any paperwork headaches. Now, I've got to be straight with you. While $15,000 might seem steep for a Gremlin, We're not dealing with a run-of-the-mill AMC here. This car's unique history and modifications could make it a real conversation starter at car shows. Plus, how many other gremlins do you know that can tackle snow with tracks? That being said, as with any classic car, especially one with modifications, it's always a good idea to see it in person and maybe even get a professional inspection before making a decision. You'll want to make sure all those mods were done properly and that the car is as good as it sounds. In the end, whether this gremlin is worth the asking price depends on how much you value uniqueness and conversation-starting potential in your classic car collection. If you've always wanted a gremlin that stands out from the crowd, and I mean really stands out, this could be your chance. I'm 18. I've got a real gem to share with you today, a 1962 Corvair Monza Spyder Turbo that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $12,000. Now, this isn't just any old Corvair. We're talking about the turbocharged Spyder model, which is a pretty rare find these days. Let's dive into the details. This red beauty has a 6-cylinder engine, rear-wheel drive, and a manual transmission, a combo that's sure to put a smile on any classic car lover's face. The odometer shows 10,291 miles, but the seller notes it has rolled over, so we're looking at 110,291 miles or more. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This Corvair has a bit of a bittersweet history. It was purchased in 2020 by the seller's brother as his dream car, inspired by their dad's 1963 model. Sadly, the brother passed away in 2021, and the car has been sitting since then. That's a story that tugs at the heartstrings of any car enthusiast. The seller has done some recent work on the car, including installing a new battery. They report that it runs very well, starts, idles, and runs perfectly. However, they're honest about its quirks. The clutch feels a bit chattery, and the brakes, while functional, aren't up to modern standards. But hey, that's part of the charm of driving a classic, right? The interior is described as very clean, likely redone during a restoration that the seller guesses happened around 2007 based on the tags. It's not a show car, but it's described as a really nice survivor, which is often what enthusiasts are looking for. Now, I've got to be straight with you. This car isn't perfect. It's been sitting for a couple of years, which means it might need some additional TLC beyond what the seller has already done. The clutch might need attention, and you'd want to give those brakes a thorough inspection. But here's the thing, finding a Corvair Monza Spyder Turbo in this condition isn't an everyday occurrence. These cars have a unique place in automotive history, and this one seems to be a solid example of the breed. Is it worth $12,000? Well, that depends on how much you value originality and are willing to put up with some old car quirks. It's not going to drive like a modern vehicle, but it will certainly turn heads and start conversations wherever you go. 19. We're checking out a 1978 Chevy Camaro that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $15,000. Now, this isn't just any old Camaro. We're talking about a piece of late 70s muscle car history here. Let's dive into the details. This red beauty is packing an 8-cylinder engine, rear-wheel drive, and an automatic transmission, a classic combo that's sure to get your heart racing. The odometer's sitting at 100,000 miles, which honestly isn't bad for a car that's over 4 decades old. Now, the seller's been pretty upfront about the work they've done on this Camaro. They've replaced the rear pinion seal and the oil pan gasket, which is good news because it means no pesky oil leaks to deal with. That's always a plus with older cars like this. One cool feature is that it comes with a removable front spoiler. The sellers even included pictures both with and without it, so you can see how it changes the car's look. It's like getting 2 styles in one. The seller describes the condition as good and mentions that it runs and drives smooth. That's promising, but remember, good for a 43-year-old car might not mean the same thing as good for a newer vehicle. It's likely to have some wear and tear consistent with its age. Now, I've got to be straight with you. While $15,000 isn't outrageous for a classic Camaro in good condition, it's not exactly cheap either. You'd definitely want to see this car in person and maybe even get a professional inspection before making a decision. Check for any rust issues, especially in the floor pans and wheel wells, as these can be problem areas for Camaros of this era. The seller seems open to questions, which is always a good sign. Don't be shy about asking for more details or additional pictures if you're seriously interested. Look, owning a classic like this 1978 Camaro isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's about the experience, the nostalgia, and yes, sometimes the quirks that come with an older vehicle. If you're up for that kind of adventure and have always dreamed of cruising in a late 70s Camaro, this could be your chance. Just remember, this isn't going to drive like a modern car. It's going to have its own personality, its own sounds, and its own feel. But for many of us, that's exactly what makes these classics so special. 20. I've got an interesting find to share with you today. A 1970 Pontiac Tempest, or more specifically, a T37 model, that's currently up for grabs on Craigslist for $5,000 or best offer. Now, before you get too excited, I've got to be straight with you. This one's a bit of a project. Let's break it down. We're looking at a blue sedan with an 8-cylinder engine, rear-wheel drive, and an automatic transmission. The odometer shows 141,700 miles, which isn't terrible for a 50-year-old car, but it's certainly seen its share of road. Now, here's where it gets interesting and challenging. The seller describes the condition as fair, and they're not kidding. This Tempest is currently not running and is partially disassembled. That's right, you're looking at a puzzle on wheels, folks. But before you click away, hear me out. There are some positives here. It's a complete no-hit car with matching numbers driveline, which is a big deal for collectors. The bumpers are described as excellent, and the glass is in good shape. Plus, it's been reupholstered, so at least the interior might be in decent condition. It's also sporting Rally 2 wheels, which is a nice touch. However, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the rust in the trunk. The seller mentions minor rust on the passenger side and surface rust in the trunk. Now, minor rust can sometimes be an understatement, so you definitely want to check that out carefully. The good news is that the seller says they have the parts to reassemble it, plus some extras. That could save you some headaches in hunting down rare components. And it comes with a clear title, which is always a plus with older vehicles. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This Tempest is going to need a lot of work. It's not a car you're going to drive home today. But for the right person, this could be an exciting project. The T37 is a less common variant of the Tempest, which could make it an interesting conversation piece once restored. At $5,000 or best offer, it's priced in project car territory. Whether it's worth it depends on your skills, patience, and how much you love these old Pontiacs. If you're handy with a wrench and have always dreamed of bringing a classic American sedan back to life, this could be your chance.